Episode 11, clarify everything. Couple of key stats here. We have broken 100 all platform plays on Spotify, which is awesome. We're currently sitting at 102 with the last 50 of those coming in the last 3 weeks. It's been crazy because we're starting to see that, that little exponential growth, little turn upwards, Took almost 2.5 months to, break that 50 mark, but now in the last 3 weeks we've hit another 50. So hopefully we'll be averaging 50 a week here soon.
All right, all I have to do is continuously say stupid stuff, and eventually people will just be involved and they'll just be here for the carnage. Just be here
I
to
was
listen to
talking to
it.
my grandpa because he, like I told you, he discovered our podcast organically. I did not pitch it to him. He'll hear this soon enough. But I was telling him, I was like, dude, like we just all our conversations just devolve into madness. Like they just don't have no rhyme or reason. That's why every title is so random. Like episode 10's title was ChatGPT, Iron Man, and Android Warfare. And it's
Yeah,
like
it's just
we start out with
um.
like one thing and then it kind of just, transfers down into something else.
But what was the last time you had a conversation that wasn't what didn't just do that?
Yeah.
The rest of the time it's we're going to talk about this today for an hour. That's boring. I don't want to talk
Yeah.
about anything for an hour.
Yeah. So first thing that I wanted to talk about, which I kind of hinted at already, was the quote unquote birth of direwolf puppies. All right. Twofold fun fact for the listeners. The way that Matt and I met was at jujitsu, right? We were at the same gym together. And interestingly enough, I think before Matt got there was a man who worked there. His name was Devin. He was working here at UC Davis to get his PhD in, I believe, like genetics or something, sketchy.
Mhm.
And he actually moved away to go to Boston to work for this company. And he's currently working on the woolly mammoth project, on bringing them back to like put them out in Serbia or something like that, and like put them out in the polar ice caps. Something crazy, but fun fact that we actually know some of the people at this company who have
Mhm.
been working on this direwolf project. So I guess my question or something I wanted to pick your brain on was A, how can you call it birthed? It's like in my head that does I don't know if birthing is the right word for that. Spawned might be an interesting word, you know. But two, are they dire wolves? What are the impacts on this from not only from a scientific perspective, but from like a humanitarian perspective and maybe just like, Americans in general?
Well, it's so let's break it down one step at a time. Birthed. I mean, that's actually a pretty easy question to answer because they're born. They're puppies. So I mean, you this was tried a
Hmm.
jillion years ago with Dolly the sheep.
Right.
Let's clone a sheep. Now the Dolly was significantly more complex because there were more pieces that were involved, and we didn't know a lot at that point when we tried to do that. It was absolutely shot in the dark. The end of Dolly's story was kind of terrible. Dolly had a terrible life. Things didn't work
Hmm.
right. Organ systems failed. She died. Stuff like that. Because genetics at that point, we didn't have a deep enough knowledge to understand how to quote do things right. Do we have that knowledge now? I don't know. There's genetics is such a massively complex field. You're dealing with billions of possibilities, trillions of combinations of information. You start crazy scientific notation, 10 to the third, fifth, seventh. You start getting crazy amounts of data that are having to be put together to actually create a living body. But at this point, we still know you take a sperm, you take an egg,
Hmm.
you put them together, you get a zygote, keep going, you get a fetus, you get a baby, you get a person slash direwolf. So that's what they did. They engineered the sperm and the egg. I didn't read enough to understand actually where it went, and most likely it was the egg, because that's where you're carrying most of the genetic information and did put them together, created a zygote, implanted it in regular, I think it was a gray wolf, and then the gray wolf gave birth to direwolf puppies because that was the egg that was created.
Hmm.
So they birthed direwolf puppies. The question
Oh,
that I
okay.
have,
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty direct. The question I have about that, which don't get me wrong, this is amazing science. I love seeing this kind of stuff. Some of the things I'm going to say as I answer the rest of your question might seem like I don't, but I absolutely think this is bitching.
Right.
But the other end of that spectrum is now you have given birth to an animal that hasn't been on Earth in 13,000 years, and Earth
Right.
changes. So things are different. So from 13,000 years ago, it's something as simple as bacteria in the air that might not have been present, and their immune systems might have adjusted over time that is now present in the atmosphere. They have to adapt. And the bigger question is, for me, is it a dire wolf? Now, I don't know. I would love for somebody to put some comments. Let's talk about it. If they found an intact DNA strain from a dire wolf and were able to then use that DNA strain to reconstruct the dire wolf DNA and create an actual dire wolf, or did they do an approximation, based on what they know about direwolf DNA changes to modern wolves? And I would love to read up on that. I haven't had time to actually get into it because the big, blaring headline was only a day or two ago. So so is it a dire wolf or is it a hybrid? Is it a dire wolf hybridized with modern wolf DNA? There's some questions there which I would love to have answered, because whether or not it's a hybrid or an actual dire wolf, damn thing looks like a dire wolf. So it's
Right.
we built something that's pretty close to that, which is amazing. And how they did it is also amazing science, having to figure out those pieces. The second part of your question, I think, is a little bit more salient in this conversation. Should we do this? I don't even want to answer that because you're going to be on two sides of a religious war that's going to be like the Templars versus the Muslims in the Crusades trying to murder each other. So it's not a question of should, but there is a lot to consider, when you are reintroducing a species. Is that something you're going to do long term? Are you going to make two dire wolves, see what they do, let them die, not don't let them breed, and then be done with it? Okay, well, we made dire wolves. Yay, feather in our cap. Or is this a species you are going to try and reintroduce into the modern world? If we're trying to reintroduce species into the modern world, this is sure starting to sound like Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Michael Crichton wrote books about this, made movies about it. Things can go sideways real fast. The Earth is a giant, complex ecosystem, and everything has a space in there. We've reached some level of equilibrium right now in that system. We as humans tend to disrupt that system pretty heavily, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're destroying it or damaging it or anything like that. Like a lot of people talk about, we are making changes to it, and those changes are going to make it more or less hospitable. So this is just another change that we're introducing into the system. Will it make it more or less hospitable for humans or for dire wolves or for other, are these wolves going to end up being like actual dire wolves, bigger, faster, stronger, hungrier than most gray wolves right now, which means they could outperform certain wolves that exist right now and maybe carve a niche for themselves and then maybe push out some other species that currently exist. But that's something that will take several wolf lifetimes and large packs to figure out if it's going to happen. We're not talking about 20-foot tall dire wolves like you had in Game of Thrones, despite some of the
Right.
references. They're not going to come out and be, able to eat other wolves and just push an entire species out. That is not the case for the saber-toothed tiger. They actually try and bring a saber-toothed tiger back, which was another conversation. That is a massive animal that will, in fact, eat other ones that are in the way
Yeah. Or like a
to,
short-faced bear or something like that.
right,
Oh my
right, to
God.
carve out its space. And then going to your other point about talking about the mammoth is also a massive animal that requires a significant amount of food to be able to continually exist and breed and grow its space, and it does use tundra. But in an interesting fact that many people don't realize, mammoths were still alive when the pyramids were built.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there were still mammoths not that long ago. The pyramids 3 to 4 thousand years ago, mammoths were still there. So we're not talking about a 13,000 year gap like we are with dire wolves. We're talking about 3 or 4 thousand years. Environment hasn't changed all that much in 3 or 4 thousand years. It has noticeably for us because we've kind of reached a precipice where, carbon in the atmosphere and things like that are creating some interesting and remarkable atmospheric changes. But that doesn't mean that the mammoth couldn't just, show up and start eating and still have the right bacteria and things like that to be able to digest. There would be some challenges, but it wouldn't be that far off. It wouldn't be like a dire wolf. So it also wouldn't be like a saber-tooth tiger because they were around, or they were much further back as well.
Right.
So is there an ecological impact? Of course, you introduce anything into an environment and there's going to be an impact, but it's a question of how big it is and how much of it's going to change. And I think those are interesting scientific questions that we should try and answer as we're doing some of this work, because there are species that through our work, through what humans have done, we have driven to extinction that might have fulfilled a niche that we don't know about. that might do something really interesting. And the argument that I have around this is always the same, which is mosquitoes.
Hmm.
We have the technology to sterilize mosquitoes. There's been conversations going on about it for 10 years. Make them sterile, make the males sterile, have them breed. The females can't have kids, they die off, blah, blah, blah. Kids have offspring, and then they die off. And there is a real driving human need for this. Malaria kills hundreds of thousands of people per year, and mosquitoes are the primary vector. So making less mosquitoes makes sense on the surface. But mosquitoes are a key part of ecology in a large swath of the world. Without mosquito eggs or mosquitoes, dragonflies don't eat. Dragonflies don't help pollinators. We run out of pollination processes. Blah blah blah. That's an absolutely overdramatic way of talking
Right.
about that. Dragonflies aren't the only pollinator support. So there's a lot of other processes at work there. But that's what I'm getting at with the interconnections in these systems is they're hyper complex, and being able to map those is something that we use big computers and AI and all sorts of crazy stuff to figure out. And we want to answer that question. We want to say, okay, what happens when we introduce this? So I don't think, although some people have already said it, that cloning and birthing an animal that died off 13,000 years ago is scientifically irresponsible. I think it becomes scientifically irresponsible if you do it without your eyes open, without having a plan, without thinking about what you're going to do further down the road. We have to apply science. That's how
Right.
we advance. By not applying science, we don't go anywhere. We don't do anything. We stay in the same spot. And science is not just let's clone a sheep or let's birth a dire wolf or let's build a mammoth. Science is let's apply statistics to financial markets. Let's apply mathematics to how we architect bridges. Science is the application of that knowledge. So in this space, we are looking at a biological entity that is introduced into a very complex system, and we can figure out what happens when we do that. We can simulate all those systems and see what happens. Now, ultimately, I think the answer that somebody's going to want to, or the question that somebody's going to want to ask that we need to answer is, what happens when you put dire wolves back out in the large world?
Right.
Now, we're not going to know the answer to that until we do it. We're going to be able to guess. We're going to be able to guess really well, but there are so many factors that we can't simulate because they're just the processes or the system is too big for us to even
Yeah.
simulate it. So, can we guess? Sure. I mean, we don't know the ultimate genetic expression of a dire wolf. Is it 8 feet tall? Was it supposed to be 8 feet tall? Is it supposed to have teeth that are 7 inches long? Is that the ultimate genetic expression that this animal could achieve? And it didn't because there was other things that were holding it down. There were other ecological forces that were keeping it from reaching this pinnacle state that it could reach. Is it at the pinnacle state now? One of the interesting connections that we make around that is you look at a silverback gorilla when it is in captivity, and they're a couple 100 pounds. You look at them in the wild, and they're almost twice that. There's
Right.
big, muscular, monstrous things, because they have to fight and they have to maintain their territory and protect their family and move fast and do all these things. So that animal is now at a pinnacle state and constantly evolving to be in a stronger pinnacle state based on the environment that it's in. Now, I say stronger, that doesn't just mean physically stronger. It can mean it's more resilient, or it can eat other food, or it can sustain against disease longer, and things like that. So, what's going to happen to the dire wolf when it needs to get stronger, when it's got evolutionary pressure that's driving it? 3 generations from now, is it going to run faster than any other wolf out there? Is it going to be able to eat more? Is it going to be able to eat different things? And so these are all really cool questions that I'm really excited to ask. But at the same time, I think we have to be responsible when we're asking those questions. And so far, it seems like they're being responsible with the process. So I'm excited to see where it goes and what they're going to do. And honestly, I think my kids would freak out to see a mammoth. So it might be kind of cool to actually just do that and see what happens.
Yeah. So I've just now taken a little bit of a look of like the Colossal Labs website, which is like the
Mhm.
company who made the direwolves. And it looks like, at least for the most part, their plan is eventual like reintroduction of all these animals, right?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of their whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like they're doing this for like a conservation sake, where it's like obviously they're doing it for the science too, but so I think that man, I'm trying to remember what Devin used to talk about. Whenever we'd talk between roles and stuff, and he would always talk about how like woolly mammoths helped stop climate change and the ice
Well, they
caps or
totally did.
yeah,
They
or
totally
stuff
did.
like that. And so I understand like on certain things where like there are obviously problems, but I think on some of these animals it might be a net positive. You know what I mean? Like if you take something, especially like a woolly mammoth, a dire wolf, I mean, personally, like we've talked about reintroduction of wolves before, where it's like, I don't know if I can get behind that personally.
I think
But
though,
the
I think
woolly
I'm gonna cut
mammoth
you off. I'm gonna
one,
cut you off. I'm gonna cut you off. For you personally, Shane, I think
yeah.
if you did some homework on what direwolves actually did and how they
Mm,
operated, you might feel a little better about it. They're a little different than how current
okay,
wolves
okay.
operate and what they do. But anyway, please go on.
The thing is for me, it's like you say, all right, we found this super cool wolf. It's bigger, stronger, faster than every wolf you've ever seen, and it's still a wolf. And I'm like, all right, that sounds cool. Wolves do what wolves do. Let's keep them in like, Alaska or something. I don't know. It's just like let's keep them away from me. How about that? Or like the other thing that kind of gets me sometimes is like you talk about the ecological effects of like, the mosquitoes going away. It's like when
Hmm.
the wolves went away, coyotes flourished,
Hmm.
right? And now we have coyotes in every city in America. And so that's something that I think about where it's like you see bears in San Jose sometimes, or like, you
Hmm.
see coyotes or, these things. It's like 100 years from now, 50 years from now, when it's like we've brought all these crazy animals back, it's like, do we get like a short-faced bear in like Burbank? It's like like that would be terrible.
Well, and there's you're stumbling around in a positive way. You're stumbling around one of the most basic and challenging theories in evolution.
Right.
You get a lot of religious argument around evolution. Oh, humans didn't come from this. Why do we still have primates? Blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to get into any of that now. We're talking about like smaller scale evolution. A species has to adapt to its environment. It has to, or it doesn't succeed. So quick, effective adaptation is a primary component of most genetically driven species, which is everything that's alive that we understand right now. So being able to change based on the environmental change is a critical part of how those species continue to operate. The most powerful tool that exists in genetic evolution is intelligence.
Right.
The smarter a species is, the more capable they are of filling in that space. You and I have talked about this off camera before, but I would call people's attention to crows.
Hmm.
You know, eh, these birds are scary smart. They will figure things out in ways that, and we don't know how their brains work because they're a little tiny avian brain and it's still able to do math. Like figure out, I'm going to put six rocks in this and the water's going to float up and I'm going to be able to eat the seeds. That's something that we thought was strictly the domain of dolphins and primates,
Right.
is being able to problem solve at that level. And this bird that has a brain that's like the size of your thumb is figuring this out faster and more efficiently. They will build tools and use them to go get things. And then they will communicate that to their offspring.
Right.
There
Yeah.
is there is an interesting level of intelligence that exists in a crow. And that intelligence we didn't know to even pay attention to it because we didn't care about crows. And then somebody said, "Let's study crows." Maybe it was Edgar Allan Poe because it was Raven who's pissed off. So I mean, we said, "Let's study crows." So we started doing that. We're like, man, these things are really friggin' smart. They're figuring stuff
Oh yeah.
out. So are there other species that have died out through strange ecological challenge that have the capacity to display intelligence? So are modern wolves smarter than older dire wolves? The dire wolves might be bigger, stronger, faster, but if the modern wolves are smarter and use pack hunting tactics and use strategy, they will outperform the dire wolves,
Right.
regardless of size or strength. Now, obviously, going back to jujitsu, you know that at some point size and strength can get you real far.
Oh
It
yeah.
doesn't matter how
Us high
smart you are.
calorie grapplers have done fairly well.
But we also know that a very skilled,
Hmm.
very cagey, very smart, lighter weight grappler will take you apart
Yeah.
because they know how to turn that strength against you. So the coin flips both ways in this scenario. So if we look at like your analogy about a small faced bear, did that bear have the capability, the capacity to expand its intelligence when it was put into an environment where it needed to? Would 10 generations later, we have a really smart small faced bear? And
Oh, that'd be
then if we have,
horrifying.
right, if we have a really smart 2,500 pound bear, that is able to move at 40 miles an hour over broken terrain. There are tanks that can't do that.
Right,
So,
right.
so it's when you think about the reintroduction of species, that is super exciting. But then we also have to think about the intelligence of this species. So if we look at modern pachyderms, we look at modern elephants, the Asian elephant, the African elephant, they are scary smart. They have scary memories. They will remember their handlers from 40 years ago.
Oh yeah.
They're super smart, but they're also big, strong. They consume a ton of resources and they're able to range over giant territory. So if you take that and increase that a little bit, make them a little bit bigger, make a mammoth, and then
Yeah.
put that in colder territory. And Devin's right as far as my knowledge goes. The mammoth actually did a lot of things to deal with carbon capture and stuff like that,
Hmm.
and the way it ate certain resources and repopulated. And it's some interesting science behind that I haven't been able to spend enough time actually working on. But that there are other species that do that work that help to stabilize the environment simply by their presence. I know we keep bashing on wolves because you actually hate them, but
I
when
don't
the
hate wolves.
wolves
I just hate wolves around me.
but when the wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone,
Hmm.
after they had been kicked out, they stabilized that environment in less than a decade.
Right.
So the less fires, less the list goes on
Hmm.
forever. Because that environment was relatively stable with the presence of that predator. So by adding something back into an environment that is unstable, we'll go back to our ecological comments earlier, you could actually be stabilizing something. But the question about that stabilization is what does that mean for the current balance
Right.
that exists in that environment? So we end up with like the worst nightmare scenario. Okay, we breed 50 dire wolves and we put them back out in Alaska. And it turns out these dire wolves have 140 IQ, and start, building small villages of dire
Oh
wolves that they're able
God.
to invade Alaska and then they have their own government. I'm
You
going
see,
like,
I'm
oh,
actually
that's
more
science
for
fiction.
that than I'm actually more for that than letting direwolves just like eat cattle and stuff.
Well, the
That'd be a
nightmare
lot more
scenario,
interesting.
the nightmare scenario in this is that you have an animal that has physical capability and intelligence,
Right.
and it's able to be resilient because of the way its environment was, and might be able to surpass our use of tools, our use of technology. So, oh, we're going to shoot it with a tank. Okay, well, you're going to get three of them, and there's 500 now. So what are you going to do with the other 496? What
Yeah.
about the
JDAM.
97th
How about
guy?
that? How about that?
Right. But
A10.
most of our weaponry is designed based on a very known target. Like, okay, we're
Yeah.
going to shoot people, we're going to shoot buildings. We're not very good at killing animals. I mean, contrary to what people think, we're just not good at it. If we wanted to
Yeah.
wipe out a whole species, we do it because we fuck up the environment, not because we'd actively wanted to go out and kill
Well,
all of them.
except for the wolves the first time. We did do
Well,
that
yeah.
on purpose. And we did that
But
very strategically.
I think that a larger, stronger, smarter
Yeah.
predator animal would be incredibly difficult for us to
Oh
corral.
yeah. Well, it's the same
That's
reason
why
why it didn't work
we
with
got sci-fi
coyotes.
movies. Yeah, that's why we got
Yeah.
sci-fi movies with a giant predator with claws and funny sounds and things like that. Because humans always assume we're at the top of the chain, but
Right, right.
there's a very real possibility there's an animal out there that is higher up or could be higher up. And then if we really wanted to dump the nightmare scenario, what if we figure out, okay, wait, we just birthed a few dire wolves. What if we just tweak some things and made them about 40 pounds heavier and able to run 20 miles per hour faster?
Or
What
eight
would
foot
we do with
tall.
that? Right. Or then we have Game of Thrones dire wolves that are showing up, and it's like, are you going to stop that thing? Go ahead and shoot it with your 30-06, and let's see if you make a dent in that thing's skull. It's not even going to
Oh
slow
God.
down. So-
Could you imagine like a direwolf with like the forehead skin of like a boar or like a pig? You know what I mean? Where like you can't like shoot them head on. And you gotta like, hit them behind the ear or something like that. Oh God.
Well, I mean that's what you're dealing with larger, stronger animals. I challenge anybody to go to the La Brea tar pits in California where there is an actual mammoth skull that they managed to get out of the tar pit. And you look, and the thickness of the skull is like that in the forehead. And that is bone material, which means
Yeah.
you could shoot that with a 50 caliber at a relatively close range and you just piss it off. Like you wouldn't even really make a dent in that thing. So you'd have to put a hole in its eye or in its
Yeah.
ear or through its mouth.
Incendiary rounds.
Yes. Well, it's got fur. You light it on fire, but it'd keep coming for a while. So,
Oh,
but fortunately for us, mammoths are not, despite what Hollywood has done, mammoths are not these aggressive, going to show up and
yeah.
murder people kind of thing. Most of the way that they're built and have been built was to defend against saber-tooth tigers or other
Mm,
animals in that particular space. So I don't think they even give a shit about humans. They'd just be annoyed with us.
yeah.
They just want to was around.
The one nice thing is like in like the most dystopian take is that they run wild and like they overpopulate and we have to deal with them again, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like in my head, I'm like this might be the dumbest way to look at it, but it's like we did it once. And like for example, like whether it was just like, Native Americans like have like running herds over mountaintops over a cliff and they like falling to their death or like things like that, where it's like there are ways around it where it's like, and especially with us now with the amount of like technology and data we have, like I feel like it's not that big a deal.
No,
But
it's
it's just like a
not.
minor inconvenience if you have to go out and like tame the direwolf population. But
Right. Wipe them all
hey, I,
out.
I know that they're making them, and one of the like reasons that Colossal Labs even does what they do is like they claim like overhunting, right?
Oh yeah.
And it's like the at least here in America, like overhunting is a really big thing in like, Africa and all these stuff where like a lot of these endangered species are, becoming extinct or whatever because of overhunting. But in America, a lot of the ways that we like, tame that or curb extinction or all these things is through like permissions of hunting tags and like, these hunting efforts. And so if, Colossal Labs came to me and was like, look, dude, like we're gonna give out, 50,000 tags a year and we're gonna make 200,000 dire wolves and you could hang a white pelt up on your wall, like, hey, I mean, if hey, that's that money
Well,
that money's going towards conservation, maybe it's two
well,
thousand
and
dollars a tag, who knows?
I mean, there is some legitimate consumerism there, being able to hunt an animal that was around 13,000 years ago. But until you have a
Hmm.
stable population,
Yeah, that's the thing.
and then it's not conservation at that point. But
Yeah,
they're generating 200,000 animals per year, just to use your
yeah,
argument, like that's not something Colossal Labs will do. That's something
no,
nature
no,
will
no,
do.
yeah, nature will
But
do that.
but taking your conversation, I guess 2 or 3 steps further, it I don't think that this work is bad in any stretch, and I don't think that reintroducing animals that have been removed from the population back into the population is bad by any stretch either. Ultimately, it's going to create some competition, which is important. And I don't think there's, we like talking about it, but I don't think there's the dystopian fear that you're going to have a 10-foot dire wolf that's going to be running through downtown, things like that. But I think that we have to think about how humans hunted back
Right.
then and how humans have hunted for a very long time. Traditionally, and there were some parts of humanity that did things differently. The Native Americans were a lot like this. Traditionally, we were persistence hunters.
Right.
We wouldn't herd animals off cliffs because we weren't big enough to scare them. So we're
Hmm.
running around with sticks and spears, and most of the time they get annoyed and just swipe at us to get us out of the way. What we would do is separate a weaker, younger, or scared from the herd and then scare them. And
Right.
as they started running away, we wouldn't run after them because animals could run faster than we could for longer. What we would do is walk after them, and we would just keep walking after them. Now, I want you to imagine for a minute that you're a mammoth, you're a teenage mammoth. You're pretty good, you're filled out, you're pretty healthy, and these crazy looking pink things come running after you with sticks. They start poking you, and you just turn trying to get out of the way. You're just leave me the hell alone, and you just run off a little bit, figuring they're going to leave like most bugs do. And
Right.
then you turn around after a few minutes, and they're walking after you. They're still coming. They still have sticks. So you just run a little further, and then they keep coming after you. And then finally, they're making all kinds of crazy noise, and you're like, I'm going to run far. So you run pretty fast. At this point, you've been separated from your herd, and you can't really tell exactly where they are. So you're scared. You're going to run off, and you're going to find a shady spot with some water and maybe stop there, take a rest for a little bit. And you just hang out and you catch your breath, and then you turn around, and these fucking things are right after you again. They just came over the horizon,
Hmm.
and they're still coming. So then you start running again until it's nightfall. You're tired, you're running out of water, you're thirsty, you haven't had food, you don't know where your herd went. You could track them down, but you need a minute to catch your breath because you're worn out. And so you take a minute, you fall asleep, you wake up, oh, look, the sun's coming up. This is great. You look toward the sunrise, and there they are again, walking after you, still coming. You keep doing that until you die. because
Yeah.
they keep chasing you. And then these humans show up and they strip down the leather and they take everything off and they have a little bit of a meal and they pack the rest of it up and they walk all the way back to their tribe wherever they were parked and what they were doing. That is persistence hunting, which is also why every movie out there that's a slasher flick, the guy that's trying to kill you doesn't sprint to chase you down. He's always just walking because this is wired into how we think. We always are turn around and, oh, here's another thing coming over the horizon. Why? Because if a giant predator tried to kill you, you died. So
Hmm.
there wasn't the opportunity to be scared. It's just a
Right.
saber-tooth tiger jumped out and just ate you, you died. Like you didn't have the opportunity to be scared. So that genetic process didn't get passed down. That genetic memory didn't exist. So if we were to resist it or persistence hunt an animal that was used to running away, at some point that animal is going to run into a resistant environment. It's going to run into a city.
Hmm.
And it's going to be walking, and you're going to have this mammoth that's just chilling and it's just walking down the hill and just ends up in Irkutsk in Russia. It's like walks into town. People are like, what the hell? Oh, there's seven people behind it that are chasing it down. And this mammoth just walked through downtown. So what are the odds? Not high. It's just kind of a fun thing to think about because they're
Yeah.
going to avoid that kind of space as well, even when they're scared. But we've evolved as hunters. We don't persistence hunt anymore. We are a much more advanced predator at this point because we use tools. So we
Like
find we find
helicopters.
well, we find what we're looking for and we sight down scope and we put one round
Hmm.
in it and then we take it home and put it up on the wall, which is great when we're trying to, oh, we want to get our trophy, we want to get some meat, we want to do this, we want to do that. I've never been a huge fan of trophy hunting because
No.
if I'm gonna hunt something, I want to use it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, some people are, and as long as you're not getting ridiculous with it, go get your trophy. Don't hunt endangered animals. Man, I've always been a
Mm.
level the playing field. If you're gonna hunt a lion, do it with a knife. Let's see how far you get.
Actually, the lion's got many knives in its mouth, so I
Right.
feel like I
So
can get.
bring 20 knives, bring 20
Yeah.
knives, it'll be
Yeah.
fine. Bring a sword. But anyway,
Hmm.
no, I'm not don't want
Yeah.
anybody running out trying to hunt a knife with a sword. You all die. But the I think that the ecological and evolutionary changes that have taken place in our environment with both us as humans, different from where we were 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and the animals that were different then is going to be really interesting to
Right.
see how these things start to interact. And we now have the technological tools to map a lot of this. Let's put some sensors under the skins of these dire wolves as they go out and start doing stuff and see what they actually do. Where not just a big bulky GPS collar, but let's get real about it and see what they're doing. Is that ethical? I don't know. I do know that as long as you're not harming the animal,
Hmm.
and it's able to continually exist the way that it's supposed to, then yeah, I don't think you're doing anything, terrible just by keeping an
Yeah.
eye on it. It's not like you're keeping an eye on your neighbor with some
Yeah.
subcutaneous microchips. You're taking a
And
look at a
that's like
dire
common
wolf.
practice. Like that
Yeah,
part is like common practice. Like they do that in dogs. Like,
yeah,
or like even like I don't know if you know this, but like if you go like fishing in certain places, you could catch like abandoned fish and like you get extra money for it. Or like
yeah.
sometimes they're like you're not supposed to catch that fish, but sometimes they're like you get down to like the south and stuff. Like some of them are like they're overpopulated, so like you get rewards for them or things like that. Or like, but they're tracked, they're tagged, so
Yeah.
like you can just call the Fish and Wildlife and they'll like give you money. But the thing is. Just one last note before I ask you another question here. With the trophy hunting thing, I personally am usually against trophy hunting. I usually think that it's typically not good just to kill things just for the fun of it. You know what I mean? Just for the decoration of it. The place where trophy hunting I don't think is all bad is the actual like conservationist thing. Because like for example, you
Yeah.
go buy like a Montana moose tag, that's like $10,000, right? Or like you go out and get like a Colorado mountain goat tag. Like those are once in a lifetime lottery tags that you paid $7,000 for. And so like those things where it's like that's a once in a lifetime opportunity. You paid a lot of money for it. And all that money goes directly towards conservation for these animals and their habitat. And in that instance, I'm kind of like, I understand. You know what I mean? Like, I'd probably do the same exact thing. Like, you know what I mean? I'd
Well, if
probably,
you if you generate some balance
yeah,
in there, you don't have 5,000 people that are out shooting 5,000 goats,
yeah,
every year so that you deplete and eventually destroy the population. I don't have people are people. They're going to do what they want to do. So I'm not going to sit
mm.
here and judge. That's a lie. I do judge a lot of people, but I'm not going to try and disallow them to do those kinds of things or to campaign against it or to lobby against it, as long as there's thought to the entirety of the system.
Right.
Sure, go out and get your trophies. Put the ram's head up on your wall. Get that because you paid $7,000 for it and you sat in the lottery for a while so that you could hunt that animal
Hmm.
and then put that animal up on your wall. If you're hunting something to extinction or you're hunting
Yeah.
something, purely for just the joy of making something dead, those are people that have never been hunted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once that changes, you don't think about it the same way ever again.
Yeah. I think at least for me, it's like I don't know, growing up it was always like if you're gonna kill it, you're gonna eat it type of thing. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so the idea of killing solely for sport has never really sat well with me. But I could understand where you're not just killing for a trophy. Like you're gonna eat it too, but like you want to preserve the trophy, like mark your hunt, maybe. I don't know.
I
I could
get
I could
that.
I could
I
understand
get
the train
that.
of thought. You know what I mean?
I get that. It's I don't like this word because it gets overused a little bit in this space, but it's more about responsibility than
Yeah,
anything
exactly.
else. Like
Yeah,
like remember that you are also a citizen of this environment, and by
right.
destroying it or damaging it, by taking something from it, you have to give something back. And depending on what that is, there's all kinds of different ways to do that. If you're using the meat for food or you're donating it or whatever, there's all kinds of ways to give back. But if you love the sport of hunting and you want to go out and you want to shoot animals once a week and stuff like that, then be smart about it. And most of the hunters I know that are like
Mm,
that are really smart about it. Like they bring their animals to the butcher, they donate the things they're doing, they
mm,
keep stuff. They do keep a lot of trophies, but the animal doesn't go to waste. They're not hunting things to extinction or beyond environmental control because they also know that if they hunt something to extinction or out of the environment, they don't get to go back and hunt it again. So they
yeah.
want to make sure there's a balance. So they're like, oh, I want to get
Mm,
my 10-point buck, but I'm just going to get one because if I get 50 of them, then there's going to be no bucks, which means there's going to be no deer, which means there's going to be no new
yeah.
bucks, and I'm never going to do it again.
Yeah.
So if you want the value of the experience, then you've got to understand that there's a give and take. And fortunately, a lot of the people I know do. There's a rhetoric around that where it's like this callous hunter that doesn't think. And I think that's a relatively small percentage of the population. So I don't pay a lot of attention to it. You and I have talked about this a lot, Shane. I do shoot and competitively at range, but I don't shoot animals.
Mm.
Most of the time I want to see if I can, put it inside of 1 minute angle at 1,000 meters. And I'm not too concerned with the animal at that point.
Oh wait, I forgot to tell you. So this is kind of off topic, but it reminded me of the range. Me and my one of my best friends, he's a sheriff's deputy, right? And we went to the range, and this is in Sacramento. And I grew up shooting. He grew up shooting, but now he's like a professional, right? Like he's not like a professional shooter, but his profession is carrying a gun and shooting, right? So it's funny. The Sacramento gun range, if you guys have ever been, is it's like a loony bin, bro. Like you see the craziest stuff there, dude. Like, and so you got like old dudes out there shooting sideways, like doing crazy stuff, like rapid fire, like it's insane. And me and him, like we're like a pretty like chill, calm, safe kind of people. But we like to do our thing where it's like, let's see what grouping we can get. And so we had like he has a copy, like a duplicate of like a gun that he like, really likes that he doesn't like to put a lot of miles on. It's like just like a standard Glock with like, like a red dot and stuff. And then he's
Mhm.
got like a 45, like a 1911 Springfield Armory. And we had one target and he's like, "All right, bro, like let's see between the two of us, like let's see how tight we can get, right?" And I was like, "I'll bet you $10 right now that between the two of us, we can punch out only the red circle, like within this thing at 8 or 10 yards, or whatever, handgun." And he's like, "All right, like sounds good, right?" And so we're looking over, and all these people are like, pop, pop, blasting, right? And their whole targets punched
Right.
holes. And me and him together put, I think it was a box of 45 and a box of 9 mil, so 100 rounds in a grouping about 3 inches, like 3 inches around, right? Two of us like trading like turns, and I was like, all right, man. There's levels to this, dude. Like these guys out here are crazy. And so like when you're talking about like your game is like getting in that tight grouping, like it's fun. It's like
Yep.
that is also very satisfying. Like, and I don't know, like for some of you guys who've never hunted before, I'm not like a crazy hunter like that, but I've hunted before. At least in my opinion, hunting is the parts of hunting that are fun is everything up until you shoot. Because as soon as you shoot, like that's fun, but like now it's
Then it becomes
work.
a job. Then
Yeah,
it's a
now it's
job.
work because now you gotta like go get the animal, carry it, gut it, do the whole thing, skin it. If you're hunting big game, now you gotta figure out how to like, raise up this like huge animal. Like it's a lot of work. But off the topic of hunting, the one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the Kawasaki electric horse concept. And
Yeah.
so and
Yeah.
so and so if some of you guys haven't like seen this yet, Kawasaki presented like the motorcycle company, by the way, presented a hydrogen power four-legged robot concept that was essentially like a mechanical horse, essentially. Or, maybe not quite a horse, but maybe like a mechanical large dog, mechanical dire wolf,
Yes.
if you will.
Yeah.
But the thing for me is like in a video, this looks cool, right? It looks cool. But I'm like, just get a horse. Like, or if you really
Yeah.
don't like horses, get a mule. Like mules, they might be a little bit, more ornery about it, but they'll keep you alive better than a horse will. Like
Yeah.
it is a well-known fact that a mule has like a stronger will to live than a horse does. And so if you're out there like in the tundra, like this guy was in this video riding this Kawasaki, and you want to like be safe and have some fun, maybe you need some pack mules, maybe you need to get a 3 or 4 mules to take you out there. I don't know. So I guess my thing is like, what do you think about this four-legged concept? What do you think about the hydrogen-powered aspect of it? And what
Oh,
do you think of the benefit over, say, like just a horse or a mule?
so first of all, Kawasaki Heavy Industries is much more than just a motorcycle company.
Yeah.
The one we know in the United States most of the time is the Kawasaki motorcycles. So
Hmm.
that's what we see because that's most of the market that they push in the US. But a fair percentage of the cranes that you see at the docks that
Yeah.
are, lifting containers are built by Kawasaki. They've been around for a long time and done a lot of that work. So you see a lot of this industrial stuff in Kawasaki's, armory of different tools and things they can build. So building something that is like this is not outside of their wheelhouse. Like it's not, they're marketing it kind of the motorcycle crowd,
Hmm.
and saying, "Oh, we can do this," because that's the crowd that would be interested in something like that. But there's an underlying purpose here that they're messing around with. And I'm gonna step off Kawasaki and move over to Boston Dynamics.
Right.
We're used to seeing Atlas do backflips and things like that. And the new one, I can't remember what the name is, the electrical powered one, being able to rotate its segments and all this other really cool stuff. And Tesla spit out Optimus. Future has spit out their the dual one that they had, the home helper, and the idea behind robots is not foreign to us anymore. There's a lot of humanoid robots that are out there, and they're the ones that tend to catch attention because we think, oh, we want a humanoid robot, running around in our house, like bringing us coffee and stuff like that. Now, it's cool to watch in the videos, but these things are expensive and require a significant amount of processing power to be able to do the work that they're doing. So, one of Boston Dynamics' early functions was a four-legged heavy lift robot called a mule,
Right.
and it was deployed with the Department of Defense in the United States for a while to test and carry over rough terrain and various equipment pieces and stuff like that. And it was hydraulic and electric powered, and it did a lot of really cool things. It was able to carry a ton of weight. And the ability of these systems to balance over uneven terrain has evolved so dramatically over the last 10 or 12 years that they can do stuff that you couldn't even imagine. You look at Boston Dynamics original videos, and they're pushing on it with a golf or a hockey stick and it fall over. And now they're throwing things at it and it's dodging, in real time. And China actually has a really interesting manufacturer that made a humanoid robot that danced with a DJ on a YouTube video. And I don't remember the name of the company, but the YouTube video popped up when I was looking at robotics a few weeks ago. And it was super interesting because people thought it was fake because the machine was
Hmm.
so fluid and able to move so well. And they thought, oh, it's just mocap. It's somebody wearing an outfit and then being,
Yeah.
motion
Motion
captured and
capture.
put,
Yeah.
yeah. But it turned out that there was a bunch of witnesses and this was actually a robot. Now, the
Were they paid by the
demonstration of
CCP to
that,
say that? No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. Jokes, guys. Disclaimer.
I mean, a lot of people, if there was, for example, if there was 5 million protesters and they were all paid $1 million by George Soros, that's $5 trillion, just as an
Yeah.
example. I
Oh,
actually did some
I'll do it for
math.
500 bucks.
Right. So I'll go protest. But the point is that machines, robotic machines, have advanced to a really dramatic level,
Right.
and are able to do some really cool things. Now, they still have constraints. You're still dealing with power problems. You're still dealing with the energy problems. They take a tremendous amount of energy to move around and to process, so they don't have a long runtime. You charge a lithium ion battery and you stuff it in there, and it'll last about 10 minutes. And then they have to
Right.
go charge themselves again. It takes significantly longer to charge themselves. So first, because we'll get back to that. First, a horse. It's just a quadruped. I mean, they make it look like a horse because that's cool. They're talking about it being a horse because it's cool. But this quadruped technology has been around for a while. It's been present in Japan and China and America and Europe actually quite a bit for a decade. There's nothing
Hmm.
new about that. Its ability to kind of move over terrain is not that hard. The mule from Boston Dynamics could carry almost 500 kilograms, so close to 1,000 pounds. And that's several people and gear and all kinds of fun
Oh
stuff that
yeah.
you strap on there. So it's not really groundbreaking in that it's present and has tech that can do these things. One of the interesting parts about it is powering it with hydrogen. I don't know, hopefully a fair amount of the people that are listening or watching this know about the Hindenburg.
Right.
Hydrogen does fun things when it gets real hot. So it does all kinds of crazy things
Yeah, it
like
writes history
fire,
books.
lots of fire, lots and lots of fire. So the energy that hydrogen is storing in that is always there. It always has a ton of potential. There's a lot of different ways you can use hydrogen to capture that energy. Whether you use it in combustion or not, there's a couple of different other ways. You can introduce gasoline to it, and the petroleum products and the carbon kind of create some chemical change, which then, you get the energy from it, but it just comes out as water. And, there's all kinds of, interesting ways you can make that power, you can generate energy from that hydrogen by itself. So I don't know a whole lot about the hydrogen method they're using because they haven't talked about it very much. They're just saying that it is powered by hydrogen. But that meets a couple of challenges and exceeds them pretty easily. So if it's powered by hydrogen, you can get more energy density than batteries currently have right now, which means you get more range. You get
Right.
more capability, you get more strength, which is really important. Hydrogen is relatively easy to refuel with, compared to recharging electric battery. And it presents some really potent returns on the amount of energy that's stored versus how long it lasts. BMW's been playing around with hydrogen power for 15 years, and they have cars that currently run on hydrogen that are available in Europe. So there's a number of ways, a number of organizations that are playing around with hydrogen. And it's not uncommon to see other fuels other than gasoline used to power things. Anybody that goes into a warehouse or has at any point in their life sees the forklifts driving around at 1,000 miles an hour, and those are all powered with propane.
Right. Yep.
So there's different ways that we can scavenge energy from different components, and hydrogen is a really good one. It's really potent and it's relatively clean. It just represents risk because if it does catch fire or there's pressure or anything like that, it will explode. So will
Just don't
gasoline.
crash. Just don't crash your new
Right.
Kawasaki horse.
So will gasoline to a degree, and we already do that with gasoline. We already
Hmm.
crash motorcycles, gasoline all the
Well,
time.
like magnesium wheels, you know what I mean? They all run
Right.
risks.
Right. And they burn up. So it's I have a bunch of pictures of MotoGP racers who have their bikes have caught on fire, over the course of years. Because I always think it's interesting what they do. They're going
Hmm.
so fast, and it's like, oh, I'm going to lay my bike down at 140 miles an hour and let it slide out because the fuel tank is on fire. So there's things that they have to do to solve that problem. And this is just another situation where you have to build secure systems around that. So do I think it's cool? Absolutely. Do I think the energy that they're going to have to use is going to be interesting? Yes, until we get to that point. Do I think you should get one over a mule? Probably not. It's a cool thing to have, and there's a space for it. But we argue with nature quite a bit. We try and say, oh, we're going to do something better than what nature did. And one of the ways we do that is with some really interesting ingenuity. And I think that a lot of the quadruped robotics, have a good place. They do good things. And maybe if you can make it cheap enough, it'd be interesting to have it as a recreational vehicle. Just like, oh, hey, I'm going to goose the throttle and it's going to gallop over this stuff. Like that, that might be kind of fun, honestly, to just mess around with that.
Yeah.
And that might be like a market segment. But I don't know how much this thing is going to cost. And then you've got
Oh God.
infrastructure,
Yeah.
you gotta, get all the hydrogen, you gotta power it with hydrogen and stuff like that. But I think that a group that would be very interested in something like that would be the military.
Hmm.
So that because then you've got a solution that can carry a significant amount of weight and you can kind of drive it while you're on it, and if you had if somebody in your party who was injured, it's much easier to carry them on that than it would be
Right.
to carry them on your shoulder, which is what medics have had to do since time immemorial. Let's just chuck the dude on our back and just start running, this long. So it's if there was other ways to do that that made unit more combat effective, then that would be really cool. And showing or demonstrating that you can power this with different ways, and that their ground sensing technology and the ability to walk and things like that has gotten that much better. That's when this starts getting really cool. Is there
Right.
a market for somebody, to go out and buy like a motorized horse, where you can throttle it and ride around
Yeah.
as a gimmick maybe, but not.
Hmm.
I don't know if there's a giant market out there when honestly a dirt bike could probably cover most of that terrain just
Oh
as
yeah.
well at this point, or an actual horse or an
Yeah.
actual mule.
Or it's like a pack of goats. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. So there's places where, and this goes back to something that we talked about a few episodes back. I think that the ultimate connection between biology and robotics and mechanics and technology is going to be when we think we take the best of both and
right.
we put them together. A mechanical horse is probably not going to outdo a horse,
Hmm.
and generally, unless you're in an absolute desert,
Hmm.
there's nothing growing, you can refuel your horse just about anywhere you are.
Yeah.
As long as you can find water and food, which you need for yourself anyway. So
Yep.
if you run out of hydrogen, then your mechanical horse is toast. But if you run out of grass and water, you're just as dead as the horse is. So it doesn't
The only nice thing, so I okay. My grandpa's gonna listen to this, and he might chuckle. But my grandpa used to say this thing when I used to ask him, I'd be like, why don't we have horses? And he'd be like, horses cost you money even when you're not using them. Whether it be vet fees or like hay
Mhm.
or whatever it is. And so realistically, one upside to this is horses have a high maintenance level. Like
Yep.
they like it could be as simple as like you can't leave like just feed out in a horse like in a horse stall because like they'll eat themselves to death. Like things
Yep.
like that. Or like that you break a leg, like you gotta put it down, like those types of things where it's like that's a lot of big reason why like ranchers and farmers and stuff nowadays use like quads or like, 4x4s or trucks because it's like you only got to put gas in it when you use it. You only got to do an oil change every once 3,000 miles. You got to pay a little bit of insurance or whatever, but it's not that big a deal. And so I could see that same logic being used in some of these areas where it's like, okay, the horse, yes, it's easier to, do all these things, but maybe we only use it once a month or once every couple of weeks, and now we're paying vet fees on a horse, every week, or we're paying, different things like deworming agents, like all these, and so I could see where they have their place, especially in like a military aspect. I could see that. But I guess to wrap it up, animals, whether they're four-legged and robotic or genetically modified and just born 6 months ago, they're pretty freaking cool.
Good stuff.
All right, guys, we'll see you later.